You remember the health class, the awkward diagram, the teacher who wouldn't make eye contact, the nervous laughter in the back row. For most Americans, that 50-minute class was the entire education they received about their own bodies. One class, sometimes two, and then silence. But the real answer to why the class felt so broken is far stranger than bad teaching. It isn't about one awkward teacher or one embarrassing textbook. It's about a 50-year experiment that most people never knew they were part of. An experiment with real consequences, run across an entire country, without most participants ever giving consent. You were one of the subjects. So was almost everyone you know? Here's the strange part. The United States doesn't actually have a national sex education policy. It never has. Instead, it has 50 different experiments running in parallel in 50 different states, often producing wildly different results. Some states teach comprehensive, medically accurate curriculum starting in elementary school. Others are legally required to stress abstinence as the only acceptable option and are not required to be medically accurate at all. Two children born the same year in neighboring states can grow up with completely different maps of their own biology. How did that happen? And more importantly, does any of it actually work? Let's go back to the beginning. In 1964, a physician named Mary Calderon founded an organization called SICUS, the Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States. Her goal was simple. She believed young people deserved medically accurate information about their bodies delivered by trained educators instead of picking it up from rumors, siblings, or nothing at all. It sounds obvious now. At the time, it was radical. Calderon's work sparked something. Sex education slowly began entering public schools through the 1960s and 70s, largely framed around biology and reproduction. Then, in the 1980s, everything changed again. The AIDS epidemic forced a national reckoning. Suddenly, sex education wasn't just about avoiding pregnancy. It was about preventing death. Schools scrambled to update their curricula. Public health became inseparable from the classroom. And then came the backlash. Beginning in the late 1980s and accelerating through the 1990s, a new political movement pushed a different model: abstinence-only until marriage education. The federal government began funding it directly. Title V of the Social Security Act, passed in 1996, allocated millions of dollars specifically to programs that taught abstinence as the only option outside of marriage and were barred from discussing contraception except to highlight its failure rates. Think about that for a second. Federal tax dollars funding a curriculum that was legally prohibited from giving students complete information about how to protect themselves. Did it work? A researcher named Douglas Kirby spent much of his career trying to answer exactly that question. Kirby reviewed dozens of program evaluations for a landmark report called Emerging Answers, examining what actually changes teenage behavior around sex. His findings were consistent across study after study. Abstinence-only programs showed little to no evidence of delaying sexual activity. Comprehensive programs, the ones that included information about contraception alongside discussions of abstinence, showed measurably better outcomes. Teens in comprehensive programs were more likely to delay first sexual activity and more likely to use protection when they did become active. That finding held up again and again. Public health researcher John Santelli at Columbia University studied why American teen pregnancy rates were so much higher than other wealthy nations, and traced much of the gap not to how much sex teenagers were having, but to how much accurate information and access to contraception they had. American teens weren't more sexually active than their peers in the Netherlands or Sweden. They were simply less informed and less equipped. Here's the twist that makes this stranger. For years, abstinence-only programs kept receiving funding, even as the evidence against their effectiveness piled up. Why? Because the debate was never really about data. It was about values. Comprehensive sex education and abstinence-only education aren't competing scientific hypotheses. They're competing worldviews about what schools should be allowed to say to children. One side sees withholding information as protection. The other sees withholding information as abandonment. Both sides believe they are keeping kids safe. That's what made this experiment so hard to end. It wasn't failing because people were ignorant. It was persisting because people disagreed on what success even meant. Meanwhile, the data kept accumulating quietly in the background. The Guttmacher Institute, a research organization focused on sexual and reproductive health, has tracked state-level policy for decades. Their data shows a pattern that repeats across state lines. States with more comprehensive, medically accurate sex education tend to have lower teen pregnancy rates. States that mandate abstinence-only instruction, or that don't require sex education to be medically accurate at all, tend to cluster toward the higher end. Correlation isn't causation, and researchers are careful about that distinction. Poverty, healthcare access, and regional culture all play a role too. But when Kirby and other researchers controlled for those factors and looked specifically at curriculum content, the pattern remained. Information mattered. Access to contraception mattered. Fear-based messaging alone did not move the needle. So why does the myth persist that talking about sex encourages it? Because it feels intuitive. It feels like common sense that if you don't mention something, kids won't think about it. But that isn't how adolescent psychology works. Teenagers are exposed to sexual content constantly through media, through friends, through the internet, whether or not a teacher ever says the word out loud in a classroom. The choice was never between talking about it and not talking about it. It was between accurate information and inaccurate information. Silence didn't remove the topic from a teenager's world. It just removed the trustworthy source. This is the modern mirror. You felt the effects of this 50-year experiment even if you never noticed it. That awkward class, the one with the diagram and the nervous laughter, wasn't random. It was the downstream result of a policy fight that started before you were born, fought in state legislatures you never voted in, shaped by researchers whose names you'd never heard until right now. And it's still being fought. As of today, sex education policy in the United States remains a patchwork. Some states require it, others don't. Some require it to be medically accurate, others explicitly don't. A teenager's access to basic information about their own body still depends heavily on which side of a state line they happen to live on. Here's the question worth sitting with. If accurate information consistently produces better outcomes, and inaccurate or absent information consistently produces worse ones, why does the debate still feel unresolved 50 years later? Maybe because it was never really a debate about facts at all. You remember the health class. The awkward diagram. The teacher who wouldn't make eye contact. But now you know what was actually happening in that room. Not a single failed lesson. The tail end of a 50-year experiment, still running with you as one of its subjects, and the results have been in for a while.